Hello and welcome to this short presentation in relation to reducing the need for restraint and restrictive physical intervention. My name is Joanne Caffrey and I'm an expert witness in relation to the use of force, the management of challenging behaviour and safer custody. And this presentation is regarding the November 2017 draft guidance from the Department of Education and Department of Health. And if we have a look at what this document page looks like here, this isn't anything new, this guidance, and it's on the back of numerous other guidance that I and my company have worked with. For example, for the custody sector, we've got the Safer Detention and Handling of Detained Persons in Custody of 2006 and 2012. And then for the prison sector, we've got the Minimising and Management of Physical Restraint, and we've got the Safer Custody of 2011. Clinical sector-wise, recently we've had the 2014 Positive and Proactive Care, Reducing the Need for Restrictive Interventions. So this guidance now in relation to reducing the need for restraint and restrictive interventions of 2017, it's to replace the 2002 edition, Guidance for Restrictive Physical Intervention, How to Provide Safe Services for People with Learning Disabilities and Autistic Spectrum Disorders. So what we're going to look at in this presentation, well, we're going to look at the legalities, we're going to look at the positive and proactive approach to behaviour, values and principles, key actions for settings and services, and different forms of restraint. First off, we need to understand the legislation and the hierarchy of law in relation to this, and you can have a presentation specifically on this page on a separate YouTube video that we've got there. But basically the Acts of Parliament trump everything. And in relation to Acts of Parliament and the use of force on children, we're looking there at examples being the Children's Act of 1989 and 2004, whereby inappropriate or unlawful use of force on a child may be deemed to be contrary to these acts, for example, physical abuse. Offences Against the Person Act of 1861, for example, an assault on the child. The Health and Safety at Work Act of 1974, failures in relation to safeguarding the employee as the member of staff or the service user, and the Human Rights Act of 1998. Underneath Acts of Parliament, we've then got regulations. So here, for example, we might have School Premises Regulations 2012 or the Health and Safety at Work Act regulations. Then underneath this, we've got Department of Education guidance, and this is where this guidance fits in. So although a lot of it is trying to link it into national acts, the guidance itself never supersedes an Act of Parliament. And then underneath this, we've got school policies and procedures, where there's a lot of variation throughout the UK in relation to schools policies and procedures. And then training packages and audits. Things here is that your training package and audit, one size, to tick a box doesn't comply anymore. And you as a commissioner of any training need to ensure that you do suitable and sufficient due diligence checks. That's both of the trainers that's providing the training and the actual training package. Just because you've used that trainer and or package for the last however many years doesn't mean that it actually fits your needs, that it's not suitable and sufficient to the demographics of either your children, young people, or your staff demographics. And also there's a requirement to ensure that any package is tailored to meet your needs. Consideration if it doesn't comply with that is then that staff could then be looking at being allegations of assault against them, false imprisonment or physical abuse. So moving on, looking at what's in the guidance document and about a positive and proactive approach to behaviour. So reducing the incidence and risk associated with that behaviour, promoting and safeguarding the welfare of children and young people, and eliminating inappropriate use of restraint. So these are three key areas in this document which are nothing new for our company dealing with, because we deal with these and have done for many years with the custody sector and the care sector and the clinical sector. Also the issues about terminology. Different providers, different systems will talk either about restraint, restrictive interventions, physical interventions. At the end of the day, an actual restraint is the use of force to restrict the liberty or movement of the person. Restrictive intervention or physical intervention, this is a deliberate act to restrict the person's movements, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's any physical touching or hands-on of the person. This actual guidance document produced applies to a variety of settings, which include special schools and PRUs, so pupil referral units, children's home, local authority foster care placements, and all settings providing healthcare commissioned by the NHS. It states that it's also of interest to mainstream schools and further education colleges. However, just because it says it's of interest to mainstream schools and further education, this doesn't mean to say that the mainstream schools and further education colleges can just ignore it, because you've still got all your legal obligations under all the Health and Safety at Work Act, and still to provide safe systems of work. Also to bear in mind now is that the Care Quality Commission are now working with Ofsted in relation to up-and-coming joint inspections. Care Quality Commission and Ofsted will have regard to this guidance when assessing service providers for safe care, and the Care Quality Commission will ensure that exposed children have access to high quality care and support plans. Service providers, so the schools, should promote positive behaviour, reduce risk and eliminate unnecessary use of restraint. And they need to have a hierarchy of responses to include, for example, environmental adjustments, de-escalation techniques and external expertise when appropriate. Now, these are all areas that my company can help you with. We have a multidisciplinary team in relation to these, and we work with many schools throughout the UK now. When we're looking at values and principles, the values and principles from this document have actually been taken from the Independent Restraint Advisory Panel, and these are based on the 2008 guidance to custody settings. So again, these are core values and principles that we've been dealing with now since 2008. So the core values are in relation to the safety and welfare, and that's both the child being restrained and the member of staff, to make sure that the kids are treated with fairly and with dignity, and that you're minimising risk of harm, and that you're considering restraint versus intervention. And also the best interest test. This is a big area in itself where people don't always understand what the best interest test is. So the key principles then underpinning this is that restraint should be the last response. The use of restraint should be based on the assessment of risk, and techniques must be applied with the least amount of force for no longer than necessary by appropriately trained staff. And they must be subject of audit with the best interest test also applied. Now, the issue of audit is an essential one there, because so often in cases that I'm working with is that there's very little management in relation to the audit, the debriefing, and looking at what members of staff are using what number of interventions on what particular children. Is there a disproportionate amount of restraints being used by a particular member of staff, or a disproportionate amount of restraints being used on a particular child? So looking at key actions for settings, you as a setting need to ensure that you're measuring the causes, that you're assessing what's happening, that you're looking at your risk reduction, and you're reducing the need for restraint. Also, the governance and accountability of the use of force that's used on your site, and sound measures in place for training staff, and we're going to look at training of staff separately. That you've got suitable systems for monitoring, recording and reporting, and that you're reviewing and debriefing, and that these are timely. You know, it's no good just doing them once a year. They need to be timely after every use of force, ideally. Environmental adjustments, do you actually understand what that's about? And this is where, for example, our occupational therapists can assist, especially when there's children with sensory integration issues. That your support plans can actually meet the standards of the Care Quality Commission, and that you're having regular reviews of policy, and that you've got programs for reducing inappropriate restraint. And all of these areas, at times, it's beneficial to have an independent company or person come in to actually advise and give you a fresh set of eyes. Approaches typically include the multidiscipline approach of person-centred care and planning, and this is looking at both the person-centred of the child plus the individual member of staff who's involved with this child, because one member of staff, for one example, might be in their 50s and they're 4'5", where the other member of staff may be in their early 20s, 6'2". That there's a skilled assessment in relation to what's happening, and also to try and find out in relation to the child what their needs are, and that you've got professional behaviour support plans which can withstand that scrutiny. So when we look at the training and development of staff, training should be tailored to take account of the needs of children and staff. One size does not fit all. For example, you might have a child with Down syndrome, And that child with Down syndrome then will have underlying specifics that we need to take into consideration, like hypermobility of the joints, heart disease or defects, that we're covering approaches to minimise the need for restraint, that staff fully understand the principles of restraint and the assessment and management of the risk, and also about the support plans, how to write them, what's in them, how to understand them, and alternatives to restraint. Also, the use of planning tools to promote safety. And a keynote here in red here is it's up to the setting and the service to commission the training they require to meet the needs of those they educate or care for, plus the staff involved. The trainers that you have on site should be competent enough to be able to adapt a package there and then to fit the needs and capabilities of the particular members of staff, and also in light of the staff, say, a particular child or service user, that things can be adjusted there and then by a member of staff who's got the competency to be able to do that. And the setting must conduct the due diligence before commissioning any training. Just because you've used that training for the last however many number of years doesn't mean to say that it's safe or that it's going to withstand any liability claim. And there should be a clear protocol for when to call the police, and staff should be aware of respiratory and cardiac failure in addition to other medical issues. In relation to medical issues, we have a separate video online in relation to underlying medical conditions during restraints. And monitor the young person's well-being throughout the incident of the restraint. And there we're looking at issues like the breathing capability, their oxygen saturation, the blood pressure. Also then post-incident care and first aid considerations. Do your staff actually know what they should be checking and what they should be doing? And post-incident debriefs and your paperwork. And for this paperwork and debriefs to be hot debriefs as well as cold debriefs. And for it to be as soon as possible. Waiting 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks is not best practice. Care Quality Commission and Ofsted will review the recording or failure to record any use of restraint. And a key point here is that someone not involved in the incident should be involved in the post-incident reviews as far as possible. Persistent or inappropriate use of restraint should be identified, and otherwise intervention could be unlawful and criminal. So different forms of restraint, there are different programs will deliver different techniques. There is no one national list of saying these are acceptable restraints and these are illegal restraints. Every training company will have their own techniques that they're advising as their core set of techniques. But staff must not cause deliberate pain. Staff should avoid restraints which impact on the airway, the breathing, the circulation or the blood pressure. And if a young person is on the floor, they should either be released immediately or moved into a standing position as soon as possible so that it's a safer position. Plus constant communication throughout the entire process for de-escalation purposes. So the question now that I would pose to you is, what is your school or nursery currently doing to comply with this guidance and, more importantly, the law to minimise and reduce the need for physical intervention and restraints? And what independent reviews and assessments have you commissioned? And if you want any advice in relation to this, then my name's Joanne Caffrey. I'm a national expert witness for the use of force and managing challenging behaviour in schools and safer custody, care settings and clinical settings. And the two websites are listed there, plus the email addresses. But please do not hesitate to contact us at any time. The emphasis needs to be minimal restraints and only those restraints that can be lawfully proved to be necessary, reasonable and proportionate in your work environment. Thank you very much.